Go. Everybody is joining. How exciting.
He wants to get
So much noise. It's like you've been
No, I'm
injected into
trying
a
to find
cocktail
them,
party,
Daria.
isn't it?
Mute all. Mute all. There we go. A lot of people coming in. All right, good morning, everybody. Good morning and welcome. Thank you ever so much for joining our webinar today, our PAS 2035-2023 webinar on the changes that are up and coming. I think we're going to give it a couple of minutes just to make sure that we've got everybody who's registered. We have a hell of a lot of registrations that have come through, which makes me very, very happy. And it is only 11:02, so I think if we give it a couple of minutes, just for us to kind of settle in with everybody. If anybody does have any questions, we do have a Q&A function which should be enabled, so please either dive into the chat box or add in a question to our Q&As. We'll have people joining. Lee, are you cool to keep an eye on the lobby list for me, please? Thank you very much.
You can then play it.
Didn't hear a word of that. Was Angela, was that you?
Not unless I've turned into a man.
Oh, I didn't hear that. Hi, Angela. Oh, there she is. Hi.
Hello.
So glad you're here.
So glad I'm here.
So glad you. Do you want me to do it? We're not going to be talking about the end
No.
walls, but
Let's
I
not
bet
talk
there's
about that.
loads of you guys from up north.
It's never been our accent. It's never been a northern accent.
I
You've just
do
never
such a
ever,
good
it's
northern
never,
accent.
you've never improved on the northern accent.
Do
From
such a good
Wales with the sheep.
Wales.
You thought that was me.
Did. I'm gonna try and we'll just make sure that we've got. Let me just pull the attendees back up.
You want cameras on or off?
Oh, you can keep on. Isn't it nice to see Ben again? Have you seen Ben since he trained with us last, Angela?
No.
That literally was about 5 years ago.
Oh no, I've seen you since then.
Yeah. Well, Ben or me?
No, Ben. Well, both of you. I saw Ben. Didn't I see you at? Where did I see you?
Probably at one of the many conferences where I just push my big face about, to be honest with you.
That
Celebrity
is
in this.
possible. No comment.
Still got people joining, guys, and just going ba-bing, 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 ba-bing.
How many have you got registered, Laura?
189.
Wow.
Wow, indeed. Wow, indeed.
It's a big DA course.
Big DA. That's what everybody thinks they're coming on for a PAS course. We're just going to start talking about wall thickness now. I just said it's just because I got the two big hitters, haven't I? I've got Rudy and Ben, who kindly agreed to come on to this for me. That's why we've got so many people turning up. It's basically a conversation with these guys, you know. How very exciting, though. Angela, you know me, you know that, there are a handful of us that actually do get excited about this kind of chat and conversation, isn't there?
Yeah, you said it like I do.
How's your 18th edition come in?
Slowly.
Surprised your name fitted in the chat box, to be perfectly honest.
It's coming on. Yeah, I'm getting there.
You are the unofficial extra guest. I did when I phoned you the other day. You were like, all good now.
Slowly, catchy monkey. Looking forward to it.
Beautiful. So that is, well, I mean, that's 100 of us on today. That is significantly more than I expected, which is absolutely fantastic. And we are 11:06. So I think, do you know what? I think we'll make a start. You know, the beginning bit is all about getting to know us, isn't it? So if we do have anybody join, then they're not going to be really missing that much key content. So I will officially say welcome everybody to our PAS 2035-2023 The Changes webinar. It does sound very exciting when you put a little bit of emphasis on it, doesn't it? My name is Laura Morris. Thank you ever so much for registering and being here today. And I myself, along with Rudy, Ben, Lee, and I'm going to say Angela as well, because I'm probably chatting to you, Ange, are very excited to take you through a very high level but real life version of the changes with PAS 2035 that is officially starting in 3 days' time. Okay, so we've got some really good content to share with you today. There's a few things that I want to make sure that we are all very, very clear on before we start, okay? First of all, I love interactions in any session that I do, that I hold, that I'm a part of. It might be a little bit challenging for us to have integrated comments and conversations today, because when we do start going through the content, it is going to be quite technical. But I would really encourage everybody to slide into the chat box if you've got any questions, if you've got any comment, if you've got any feedback, please share it with us. I've got beautiful Lee Monitor in the chat box, and she's gonna, if there's anything that's actually, you know, relevant to the point that we're speaking, she's going to interject. If not, we do have a chat, a question and answer session benchmarked for the end. Following on from that, it would be super kind if you could all keep your mics muted, because background noise can be very, very disruptive. You may not be able to hear it, other people can, okay? If we have the opportunity to get chats going, I'm all over it. But if not, please can we keep our mics muted just to make sure that everybody can hear the content that we are sharing, as well as see what's on screens. I will send the slide set out post-session, and there will be a recording. So if you do want to copy, if you think it'd be beneficial, you all have my email, because I've emailed you out. So please send me an email and we can get that over to you. So for me, first things first, okay? I'm going to skip a slide a little bit. I would just like, if you are able, a bit of an emoji thumb to tell me yes, if you can see my slides on your screen, please. Beautiful. Lovely job. A couple of us, I'm going to, yeah, there we go. All the hands are going up. That's beautiful. Fantastic. At least you can see what I'm sharing. So this is a rough guide for today. We are keeping it simple. We have a lot to cover. We don't have much time. So we are going to be going through some introductions. That is one of the most important things I want for you guys to know who we've got on this call today, if you do not already know. We're then going to go over a very basic retrofit principles reminder. This should be telling you guys how to suck eggs. Okay, this absolutely is. It's a reminder of why we're in the industry and the key principles that we all should be following. We're then going to go into the simplified, and I use simplified in quite a funny way because we are going technical. We are giving you as much detail as possible, but we are giving it in a very simplified, in a very real life way. We'll go through the list of changes, and hopefully by the end of this session, you guys are going to feel a little bit better about what's coming. And about what will need to be souped up in a way for our retrofit SHDF eco projects moving forward. And then I've left some time for a Q&A with Ben and Rudy. We are officially closing this session at 12:30. As I said this morning in the email sent out, I'm giving a 30-minute overhang for anybody who kind of wants to hang around and who's got some questions and who wants to talk about anything, potentially project specific or potentially around the industries, the businesses and the guests that we have got on today. So, introductions. I'm going to do me first of all, because I've got a photo. So I'm just going to tell you who I am. For those of you who do not already know me, my name is Laura Morris. I am based in the glorious South Wales Valley, so if my internet does drop off, it is because the sheep do run our Wi-Fi, as Angela knows, and they're going to be very tired because they've worked very hard for me over the last couple of days. I've been in this industry about 6 years. I started off as a domestic energy assessor. I then spent a number of years training people like you guys to be domestic energy assessors and retrofit assessors as well. I'm trained in traditional buildings, I'm trained in Legionella, although I don't really touch that. It's not really my bag. And I spent a number of years on the background side of it. I then moved to be a surveyor. I've spent some time in the field. I've spent some time working for social housing, working for Able to Pay clients as well. I then went into a little bit of consultancy, so supporting people on their PAS journeys with quality management systems, with getting their procedures into place. And over the last 12 months, I've kind of amalgamated and done a little bit of everything of that together. So I've done a little bit of practicing, done a little bit of training, worked with people on their 2035, 2030 and 2038 focuses to make them feel a little bit more confident in this business. I've worked with small installers, medium installers, very large tier 1 contractors, and alongside that I'm also an installer for loft insulation. I am a PRAS accredited installer, currently 2019 actually, not 2023, 2019. My assessment's coming up very soon for B9 loft insulation. Again, I work with councils, social housing on a number of different funding schemes within that. The reason I'm telling you all that is because I'd like you to think that you are 1/3 of the panel today. Is definitely you are in safe hands. The other two gentlemen that I'm going to introduce to you don't really need an introduction because I'm pretty sure that 99% of you on this call are going to know them. And that is Rudy Agnew-Hotry, who currently works for the Specifics Group, and Benjamin Nixon, who works for Bailey Garner. I'm going to hand you over to those guys just for a very brief introduction for them to say hello to you and brief introduction of who they are while I check the chat box. So Rudy, I'd just like to hand over to you just for a couple of minutes, if that's okay.
Thanks, Laura. So before I introduce myself, I just want to wish Laura a very happy birthday. I think it's commendable that you're working so hard on your 25th birthday. Back to my friends.
Can I just say this is Ben's fault? I wanted to do this Wednesday, but he was far too busy, so we had to push it to Friday. So I'm just going to say that's Ben's fault. Absolutely. But thank you, Rudy.
So good morning, everyone. So I'm Rudy Agnew-Hotry. I'm a director at Specifics Group. I particularly lead design specifics. Over the last 20 years or so, I've been involved in construction in some shape or form. So new build, fit outs, the whole lot. Across many different countries, different continents. Over the last 6 years, I've been focusing on retrofit in the UK. I've led operational delivery and compliance, including PAS compliance on over 10,000 deep retrofits. And my team and I have supported, I think, over 30 SHDF projects now. Very pleased to support this session alongside Ben and Laura. Thank you, Lee, for supporting as well. Just one other thing, I've noticed a lot of familiar names in the background in attendance here, and a lot of these people I consider experts, so I'm not just here to present, but also to learn. So thank you.
Thank you, Rudy. Ben?
Hello,
Are you missing
everybody. Okay, should I crack on, or did someone want to say something? There's a question for Rudy already, which is absolutely classic, really, isn't it, to be honest with you? Just thank you ever so much for inviting me on today to talk, Laura, and to answer some questions. So my name is Ben Nixon. I am the National Retrofit Lead, and I'm a Senior Associate Partner with Bailey Garner. I'm also a Chartered Construction Manager and Building Surveyor, and I've been involved in the construction sector, specifically the social housing sector, for the last 19 years. And that includes working for a number of large housing associations. Started our retrofit department with the inception of PAS 2035 at Bailey Garner, and currently work on some really interesting retrofit projects for local authorities and housing associations on the client side and PAS 2035 role side. And thank you ever so much for working on your birthday and doing this, Laura. You could say that Rudy is potentially your present, I'd say, as well. It's a very good gift to have.
And he's just a gift, isn't he?
He really is, yeah, absolutely.
He hates me saying this, but I text him often, just being like, you are just amazing. So he is. He's a gift sent to us from the retrofit gods. Everybody, I'm sure everybody will 100% agree. Thank you very much, Ben. And everybody, we also have Lee. Lee is potentially going to purposely keep her mic muted, even though I don't want her to, but she is an absolute support. Lee is part of the Energy Specifics Academy. We have kind of worked together very loosely over the last couple of months, and she is going to be my right arm while we are presenting today. Lee, would you like to say hello, please?
Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you all, and thank you very much for joining. I'll be in the background and hopefully monitoring your chat. So if you do put anything across, I'll try and keep an eye out. But obviously, if there's loads, it might take a bit of time, so bear with.
Thank you very much. And on that note, if there are questions that are coming through and we don't have time to answer them, I will certainly do a collation at the end of this session and send an email out with any questions and answers that might be super useful for everybody on this session. Okay, so before we dive into our content, first things first, if you've got a camera, pop it on. I also see some super familiar faces that I would like to say thank you so much for joining, and it makes me feel a lot more at home when I can see you guys and I know that I'm talking to familiar faces. Okay, so if you have got a camera, pop it on for me. So without further ado, let's dive into our content. Okay, so the whole point of today is to cut through any concerns, any issues, any panic that people potentially might have got into over the last couple of weeks, now that the deadline for PAS 2023 is actually, it's not even looming, it's pretty much on us, isn't it? And what you're going to hear from us today is fact. Now, I understand that there are a number of different people from different industries, and even though we are all working to the same standard, we know that real life does dictate it ever so slightly. We know that the people working in SHDF are going to be looking at the standard from a different angle than the people working in ECO. SHDF is driven by principal contractors. ECO, we know it's often driven by installers. So what we are going through today is fact. It is standard. It is the black and white. It is not opinion. If we give opinion, we will make it very clear this is an opinion. But we are going to go through what should be happening. If you're a visual learner like me, we're going through the Jenga tower. We're going through the process flow of what the standard says. Opinions aside, we might not like some of it might be quite challenging, but it is the standard. And I just want to make sure that we are all clear on that. It is the standard, it is not opinion that we are going through. And a very basic reminder of what PAS is, okay? PAS is our standard for domestic retrofit, for whole house domestic retrofit. PAS 2035 is our publicly available specification. It simply means it is available to everyone. It is the numbers we are interested in. PAS 2035 is our overarching standard in our retrofit framework for existing domestic dwellings. We then also have PAS 2030, which is our installer standard for domestic retrofit. It is the standard that our installers must be accredited to be able to install under PAS 2035 projects. It is in alignment with MCS, which is our renewable standard. The PAS 2035 and 2030 we are focusing on specifically because these two are retrofit standards, and these two are intrinsically linked, and these two have changes afoot that we all need to be aware of. The deadline for PAS 2030-2019 is the 31st of March 2025. And just to make things easy, any project started post 31st of March 2025 will have to run under the 2023 version. I'm not going to touch on the handover period. I'm not going to be doing that today. I am starting talking with the 2023 version moving forward. I also want to touch on this because fabric first approach is absolutely a hot topic. It always has been, it probably always will be. But for me, working in this industry, fabric first should always be the consideration. We know it doesn't happen in the practicality element of it. And we know that there are certain measures that should not be installed as fabric first, but it should always be the consideration. Retrofit should also always be holistic. This should not be new to any of us. We are looking at our property as one system, not separate installs. It is not a one size fits all. And along with that, we all should be very aware of how important the role of ventilation plays in this industry. As a bare rule, anytime the fabric of a property is improved, ventilation must be maintained or upgraded. Seal it tight, vent it right, burn it into your brains if it is not a phrase that you are familiar with. Because ventilation is so important, and we're going to talk about this in the standard changes. If you're not already familiar with approved document F in the relevant devolved nation, it should be on your bedtime reading list, because it is one of the most important things that we should be doing, but one of the first things that we actually forget sometimes. And getting ventilation wrong can damage a property. It can really affect the sustainability of that property. It can affect the property's longevity. And very lastly, if you trained with me before, you know I will be very, very flippant and say that good retrofit, good quality retrofit comes down to two things and two things alone. And that is education and communication. We need right people, right place, right time. We need educated, qualified individuals in the roles. They know their place, they know their process. Within this industry, every role in the retrofit process relies on the role before. So we need to make sure that we have educated, competent individuals in these roles and that they are communicating with each other. It is holistic in the sense of practicality, and it's holistic in the sense of the procedure and the process that we are following. And that should not be news to any of us, but I just want to recap before we dive into the standard. To get into the good stuff and the reason that we are all here, we are going to start and look at the summary of the changes of the PALS 2035-2023 and 2030-2023 standards. We're going to spend about 45 minutes or so on this, which gives us a little bit of time for questions. It also gives us a little bit of time for chatter, because I know that when we are discussing a topic like this, it is so much easier to take in when you're listening to a conversation as opposed to when somebody is speaking at you, reading off a slide. So I'm going to make sure that we can all get the best out of this session that we can. And before I dive into this slide, I just want to remind you, please use the chat function, please use the Q&A, because we want to make sure that we're answering as many of your questions as possible. So this is a summary of the changes, and the first one is a nice one. It's now free. PAS means publicly available. It is publicly available. You can now download the standards for free with no charge, which is absolutely brilliant. If you haven't already done it, please can I suggest you do so, because it will give you a lot of answers to questions you may have post-session today. We've removed the risk pathways, which I think is the one that most people will really know and understand. Risk pathways have now been removed. We have a clause for the allowance of the replacement for distressed heating systems, which means that now if a boiler in Mrs. Jones's house goes bang, we can sort her boiler out. We do not have to wait until the funding or the process is happening to make sure Mrs. Jones has got heating and hot water for the foreseeable. We've got easier facilitation for large-scale retrofit projects, which for some of us is going to make us smile. For those of us working in SHDF, it means that it is a simplified process. It has clarified a few things from the previous standard. We've got updated guidance for historic buildings, which is in the form of Annex E. We've got a focus on climate resilience and moisture management focus. We've got clearly defined roles and responsibilities. We've got a stronger focus on monitoring and evaluating, simplified ventilation requirements in the form of Annex C, and improved independent inspection for installers. That's it for today, guys. Thank you ever so much for joining the webinar. I hope that's answered all your questions for you. I'm joking. I'm joking. Let's go into them in some detail. So let's look at all of these in one, okay? The first detail of change that we're going to look at is the removal of the risk pathways and the distressed heating appliances, okay? Now, what this means is we are no longer risk pathing A, B, and C for our projects. It means that our projects are now looked at holistically, which is fantastic. The knock-on effect means that every property must now have a whole dwelling assessment completed. For every property, we are looking at it as one. And the retrofit assessor should be competent and qualified to be able to carry out that cool dwelling assessment. They must be a DEA as a prerequisite, and then a retrofit assessor, minimum level 3, potentially level 4, depending who you've done your qualification with. And if your building is of traditional construction, which has been defined as a building that is built pre-1919 of solid stone, solid brick or timber frame with any infill, then you will also need your level 3 in older and traditional buildings. Now we're including 2 in this slide, the distressed heating appliance replacement, because if a heating appliance is replaced due to it not being up to standard or breaking or faulty, we can exchange that out within the project ASAP. And then we are quite simply doing the retrofit assessment as soon as possible after those works have been carried out. So the retrofit assessment is done effectively retrospectively, but the distressed heating replacement just means that we can make sure that our residents, that our tenants are living in a home that's got heating and hot water, because that's really the basis of retrofit, isn't it? I had a conversation with Ben the other day, and when we were talking about this webinar, and you know, he kind of hammered home the reason that we're doing this and how lucky we are, isn't it, Ben, just to have the amount of funding that has been allocated.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You have a look at the most recent release of funding from the government through various different funding streams, and we are hovering around £2.5 billion worth of funding to be spent over the next 3 years. An entire industry has been created around this, and while kind of Green Deal and various other iterations of funding for retrofit measures have been there in the past, they have never been to this scale. So quite often, and the point I made, Laura, was we sit here and almost whinge about the standards and the stringency of the standards that we adhere to. But they're there for a reason. They're there for quality assurance, to ensure that that huge heap of money gets spent properly, which is only fair, really, I think.
Absolutely. And I think if any of us were around in the days of the Green Deal, back in, what was it, 2017? Before that, 2014? You know, the original Green Deal, you'd have Mrs. Jones, it's Jones or Davis, I'm Welsh, there is no other surname that I'm aware of. Mrs. Jones would have a loft insulation installed, and you'd go up and you'd check, and you'd find 3 rolls of Knauf still in the package, in the loft, and they would have had about 5-6K for that loft. So the reason that this standard is in place is to weed out those installers. And yes, it is stringent, and that is why I said at the start of this session, this is not opinion. Do I agree with everything? Potentially. I find some of it a little bit challenging, being a small installer. That's not what today's about, because I'm pretty sure most of us will have that little bit of certain elements. Exactly as Ben said, it's easy to sit here and whinge about it all. We need to remember why it's in place. We need to remember that the whole point of retrofit is to be creating warm, safe homes. The knock-on effect is insane, okay? Warm, safe homes, we are lowering energy bills for that occupant. We are retaining heat. We are limiting our air leakage. We are limiting the opportunity for condensation and damp to be leading to mold. We are limiting the opportunity for ill health, which then the knock-on effect is it has a lesser strain on our health system. So it's not just the insular element. The knock-on effect is insane. And that's what we need to be remembering when we're going through these, okay? And the distressed heating replacement is a very small clause, but it's quite important. So back on track, retrofit assessors, okay? Retrofit assessors should be assessing the following. I also want to kind of interject with, we are awaiting the release of the new retrofit assessor BSI standard, British standard 40104. That is imminent to come out. Which means that we have significantly better guidance on what we are expecting our assessors to do. And I think just to kind of interject a conversation with Rudy, especially with where, you know, he is working and what he does every day, remembering the fact that a retrofit assessment should be sufficient enough for a retrofit design, which is a desktop exercise, is mad. Within what we've seen, within your experience, how many retrofit assessments have you seen that have been that robust that a designer can quite easily design package of measures as a desktop exercise? Rudy, in your experience, talk to us a little bit about that.
There's very few. I come across retrofit assessments that aren't fit for purpose, and I think that's a problem with standards. So yes, we're talking about a standard, it's all there in black and white, but I think everyone, especially delivering large-scale projects, should create a benchmark for retrofit assessments. And that benchmark will be over and above what the guideline and the guidance says. And in my opinion, there's the standard and there's best practice, and best practice should always be followed. And you're absolutely right, retrofit assessments alone aren't enough to inform a retrofit design, which is why in the process you have the assessment first, you've got the coordinator then coming in, you've got the installer doing the PB first, and that should eventually then inform the design. But again, as best practice, we always go scan the buildings, look at the properties, identify any issues, and then create the retrofit design packs.
Ben?
Yeah, I think just to add to what Rudy was saying there, I completely agree. I probably see 10% at best that are great and will inform a design in terms of retrofit assessments. I think the wider issue is the standard and the interpretation of the standard. I think if you look at the standard holistically, it shows you a group of parameters that actually, if they're followed to the letter and to their intent, would absolutely inform design. I think we, in a race to the bottom, which quite often happens throughout any arm of the construction industry, have got to a point where it's almost de minimis turned into a box ticking exercise. And if you turn something into a box ticking exercise, it only becomes a box ticking exercise. It can't be used for anything else. It's not quality assurance. It isn't information for a process that exists. It just becomes a task that you have to do that doesn't actually go anywhere. And that's what I see with retrofit assessments on a daily basis.
Thank you for that, Ben. Very much appreciated, guys. Jessica Binks, thank you so much for your question. Is there any information on how the new BSI standard for retrofit assessment will be implemented and phased in? I can't answer that. I know that it's imminent. If there is anybody else that can answer that, please let me know. But as far as I am aware, Ben, go for it.
Yes, so I can kind of answer this, probably not to the largest official point, but in terms of the new BSI standard, it is being phased in both alongside PAS 2035, 2023, and it will be your accreditation bodies that phase this in for you. So it will be your Elmhurst, your ECMKs, etc., that kind of give you the information on how this is phased in. And then my understanding is that it's supposed to go live at the point that RDSAP 10 goes live. That's my understanding of it. I might be completely wrong on that, but I seem to recall reading that somewhere.
Perfect, and that's why we've got the celebrities on, guys. That's why they're you. All right. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ben. Jessica, I hope that answers your question as best we can, really. But while we're waiting for the standard, let's go through the basis of a retrofit assessment, and hopefully this is not going to be a surprise to you guys. Okay, so retrofit assessments, we are looking at location orientation and attachment to surrounding dwellings. We are looking at a heritage assessment, if needed, if pre-1919. We are looking at the installed services, the property condition, the construction, and any key features. We're looking at the installed EAMS. This is one that always surprises retrofit assessors when I have the conversation. We're looking at constraints. We're looking at technical, environmental constraints, social constraints. We're looking at permissions. We're looking at listed status. We need to make sure that it is being documented in the retrofit assessment. And, I will always make this light-hearted. I always use Peppa Pig as an example. Because if you're going to, even though Daddy Pig's an architect, if you're watching Peppa Pig and you're going to retrofit assess Peppa Pig's house, it's at the top of a point. It sits on a hill like this. And I use that as an example because that is a constraint that would need to be documented, a number of constraints. Uneven land, high ground levels. You're not going to be able to set your equipment up specifically. You might not be able to get a van up there. And whilst it's said in jest, that's the type of thing we need to be considering in our retrofit assessments. We need to be considering anything that's going to hinder that assessment, that install. Permits, country lanes, right of lights, tree preservation orders, conservation areas, location issues. All of it needs to be documented on our retrofit assessment, which quite often comes as a surprise to assessors. We need to be looking at defects, construction or structural defects. We need to be looking at leaks. We need to be looking at condensation. We need to be looking at mold. They need to be documented. And one big change in this standard is the note 1 that I've got on screen. This might require the use of test equipment or invasive assessments, including opening up of the building. In the 2019 standard of PAS 2035, your retrofit assessor role was non-invasive. It was the equivalent of a RICS level 3 home survey. You did not do invasive treatments. Now, in the updated standard, it states there that yes, it might require opening up the building. It might be requiring our tech surveys, and this is now the responsibility of the retrofit assessor. We need to do a ventilation assessment. This includes position and type of installed fans, make and model reference. If you cannot detail the fans, you should be documenting the reason why you cannot detail them. We need to detail the size and location of all background ventilators, and any functional testing should follow the process of the devolved nations. And there are guidance documents that will detail how we go about this. Airflow rates that are measured less than minimum should also be recorded as part of the assessment. Now, it does not detail that in the standard, it does detail that within the technical guides. We're not going into the technical guides today, okay? But as we can see, there is already a difference in what our retrofit assessors are expected to be doing. We also need to make sure that we are doing our EPR, our energy performance report, our RCVSR, so our retrofit condition, ventilation, significance report, inclusive of our occupancy assessment. And we need to detail any additional information that may have an impact on the project now or in the future. We've also got a note that's on your screen for some buildings, and these notes, guys, are taken directly from the standard, okay? For some buildings, particularly where the installation of EAMS is likely to be constrained, the retrofit coordinator might find it beneficial to undertake an initial air leakage assessment to focus on areas of improvement in air tightness as part of the retrofit design. And alongside that, we need to ensure that our ventilation is sufficient. Factoid for everybody, and I heard this from Angela Keyworth. Back in the day, in an older and traditional building, the natural air leakage provides up to 75% of the required ventilation. We are sealing that building. We need to make sure that our ventilation is upgraded. All of this information is absolutely in Part F. We do have minor and major measures that we need to be considering. It gives you the guide. But anything in terms of air tightness and ventilation has to become priority. Now, the data collected by the retrofit assessor should also be used to estimate annual fuel use costs and carbon emissions under actual or standard occupancy. So the RA, so I am going to be using acronyms, guys. We're in the industry, we all should know what these are. The retrofit assessor, the coordinator or the designer should be using a recognised model, either RDSAP, SAP, or PHPP, planning house package, okay? And then we also need to remember that if the dwelling is traditional, then we need to do a significance assessment in line with our BS 7913 standard to make sure that any elements of significance we are either maintaining or enhancing. BS 7913 is conservation of historic buildings, okay? Rudy or Ben, do you have any further comment on the retrofit assessment or the whole dwelling assessment?
I've got nothing really on the content, but I'd say that the kind of RICS level 3 approach to retrofit assessments was never kind of spread across the entirety of retrofit assessments in 2019 edition. I think it was part A wasn't for some reason.
That's right, it was
from
part
recollection.
C. Yes, absolutely.
But I do think that the approach to setting out your condition report in a RICS kind of survey report way is still really beneficial. I think where we see, and not to specifically pick on certain accreditation bodies. Other accreditation bodies are available. Elmhurst provides a really good way of building up a template that looks like a survey report, and then you can go through that survey report and have really good detailed information and kind of scores for defects in the property as well that might be prohibitive to design. And I think the identification of those defects always goes under the radar a little bit in the rush to get the retrofit works underway. So I think it's incredibly important to find a way and rationale to ensure that you're recording those defects so you can deal with them as part of the works or even before the works.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ben. Rudy?
I just add to that I think the standard's great. Completely agree with Ben. But again, thinking of large scale projects, if you're going into a property to do the retrofit assessment, first of all, I think the mentality has to change. It can't be 6-7 assessments per day. Do good quality assessments, take your time. But because you're visiting the property, access is a major issue on a lot of these projects. So make sure when you go to the property, log as much data as possible, all the relevant data that you can. And this can include things that go beyond what PAS would say. I mean, it does actually list out most things that Ben said. But for example, you could capture videos that could capture additional data. You could look at stock condition, including that within the same visit as a retrofit assessment. So there's a lot of additional data, really good data that could inform really good designs and installs that could be captured at the same time as the retrofit assessment.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I 100% agree. And I kind of want to hit back on I think it was the point that Ben said, actually, we kind of rushed to get these assessments done. It's true. And time is money. And we will all know that if we are working in SHDF, or we're working in an optimised retrofit programme, and we have our funding released end of March, beginning of April, our year or thereabouts to get our projects completed actually ends up in reality being half that. By the time we engage every role in the process and we get our contractors in place and our assessors in place, and then we assess all the properties and we get those done and we get the design packs done, actually, what could be 12 months of project actually goes down to 6 months of install, which is quite intense for, depending on the project that you are doing. So I understand that they have been rushed. I understand that it can go back to that tick box exercise. But we need to be considering the quality, as Rudy said, because when it comes to the design element, and there are clauses in the new standard that if we are designing single measures, in theory, we're going to be having installers designing single measures, and we're going to cover that in a few slides' time. Our installers are not necessarily coordinators. They're not necessarily designers or architects. So it does pose a little bit of a challenge, in my opinion, that actually we've got enough information in these retrofit assessments, and we need to be considering that going forward as well. Because again, I think let's focus on the fact that we do have people from government-funded SHDF projects, and we have people from eco-industry, and it does work in a completely different way. The timings are different, but the standard is the same. Rudy, go for it.
Sorry, also just to, not to focus entirely on SHDF, but what's very common in the eco and GBIS world, for example, is the retrofit assessor doing the PIBIs at the same time. And a lot of the times the retrofit assessors do not have the right qualifications to carry out the pre-install building inspections. So also move away from that. As I said, best practice, follow as, the guidance. So it's not only about saving money, because at the end of the day, once you've done the install, there are risks. And then 2 years later, you don't want Trustmark to find technical faults, failures within what you've installed. So I think if you follow best practice, yes, it's more time consuming in the beginning, but then it will be more efficient in the long run.
100% agree. Thank you, Rudy. And Jonathan, thank you for your question. We're not going to be covering part 4 today, but I know Rudy has already said to me we should do some more of these. Then that is potentially a topic for future. Rudy is part O in overheating, because we are going to be focusing significantly more on part O in terms of domestic properties as time moves on. So thank you for your question, Jonathan. Okay, so retrofit assessments, they should be robust, they should be sufficient enough to start to inform the design package. Now, moving on, we are going to talk about the next one, which is large-scale retrofits. So there are a number of updates within the standard to support large-scale retrofits for social housing, because typically the scale that we are talking, it will be done in social housing, okay? So the first one, clause 3.2, I think I've missed a dot for there. 3.2.2, might be 3.22. I'll confirm that for you. Multi-coordinators. So in the standard, it does state that some retrofit at scale projects may have more than one retrofit coordinator, which is interesting, but it goes back down to the education and communication piece. We need to make sure that we are communicating at every level to ensure that we are doing a sufficient job and we are following the standard as we should. The second element is the whole dwelling approach, clauses 7.1 and 5.4. Large-scale projects absolutely must consider the full building performance. Now, within that, there are two elements, okay? So first of all, a very big change is now designs can commence based on archetype. So we can begin by doing retrofit assessments based on archetype for the design package to start. But we do need individual dwelling assessments by the time the retrofit design is completed. So we can start based on archetype, absolutely. And if you look at the note at the bottom of your screen, although a retrofit assessment is required for every dwelling, it may be collated into a single document for dwellings of the same archetype with reporting by exception for any differences in assessment on individual dwellings. It goes back to it is not a one size fits all. Not every property is going to be the same, but to facilitate large scale retrofit, we can do design by archetype. We can present them in one document, but we must detail any differences within those properties. Rudy, would you like to elaborate on that any further? Because this is obviously your bag.
We can host one entire session on archetyping, but I think the key thing to remember is PAS has provided the term or given the term archetype, but what does archetype really mean? I think it's really important to understand that at a very high macro level, a house is an archetype, a flat is an archetype, a bungalow is an archetype. But then when you start digging deeper, a semi-detached house with a pitched roof and a suspended timber floor is also an archetype. And the same house, which has an extension in the rear or the side, is a sub-archetype. And the same property, if it was in a conservation area, is a different archetype because the improvements would differ. So I think it's great that PAS now allows you to start designs on an archetype level, but it's really important to archetype correctly. So that's the key risk here, I think. Don't rush into it. Ensure that archetyping is fit for purpose the way it's been done. It's not that all houses are one archetype. So understand what an archetype is first, I think is really important. And then based on that, definitely start your design process. But PAS then also says that before the design is actually issued, so you can have a pre-construction design and then a construction issue. So the pre-construction design can be created based on the archetype level assessments. But then prior to the construction issue, you need to make sure that the PB is being carried out, the retrofit assessment for each individual property has been carried out. So I think that's key here. And when you come across sub-archetypes within the defined archetypes, then make those necessary changes on the design packs and then move forward. Also, just to add to what you said, Laura, I think yes, the designer qualifications have now changed, but I think, again, there's a major risk associated with that. And I think we'll see this 2 years from now, a lot of technical failures on properties where systems have been designed by non-architects or people that don't have the necessary competence levels. So it'd be great if, and this is obviously opinion, it'd be great if there was some way to measure competence before allowing this to happen. So anyone that's working on whether it's small scale or large scale projects, especially when it's high risk fabric measures, please make sure that the design is being prepared by someone that has an understanding of that system and measure. Do your U value calculations, look at thermal bridges, etc.
Perfect. Ben, got anything to add?
No, really good point. And I'm going to harp on about quality and what we see in retrofit designs, assessments again, and again, taking that de minimis approach, which turns things into, again, a box ticking exercise. Rudy, how many times have you seen a design come through where you are supposed to supply building details, construction details, and you've just seen something cut and pasted off of Google that bears no resemblance whatsoever to the building that the installation is going to take place in? I think when you talk about archetyping, it needs to be real archetyping, and the detail needs to be relevant to the building at very least, so the installer can go in there and have some idea of what they're doing. And if you're allowing your designers to just kind of cut and paste nonsense details from Google or some other platform, it just defeats the object of having this quality assurance in place, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I've seen a lot of procurement, I'm not going to name and shame anyone, but there's a lot of procurement currently happening where I've come across, I've come across projects where the retrofit designer has asked the installer for the retrofit design. And I think with this change in the PAS standard now with respect to designs, that's going to happen more often. So the designer, in theory, is just going to do a sign-off service, because every large-scale project will have a separate retrofit design function, and they're going to expect the installers to create the designs. So yeah, to answer your question, Ben, I think countless times I've come across designs that don't match the actual property. Like it happens all the time. It's literally a cut and paste exercise on several projects. And again, and these properties have successfully been lodged. And what's going to happen is 2 years, 3 years later, when you come across damp and mold problems and other issues, and then you revisit this, then it'll require a new update in the standard to rectify what's gone wrong. And the amount of money that's going to be spent on rectification is going to be enormous.
And if we take it back to basics, let's take it back to absolute bog standard basics building blocks. You get a design, that design is handed over to the installer, should be full and complete. It should detail what's been installed, where it's been installed, how it's been installed, systems been installed. It should be full and complete, and quite often it's not. And my opinion is one of the issues in the industry is there is no design guidance. So you can have 5 different retrofit designs that all look different because there is no. We like a template, don't we, guys? We like a template. Yeah, we like to know how something's going to look. But we don't, because every retrofit design created by somebody is different. We know what needs to be in there. But even one company to another can be worlds apart. And obviously, Rudy, you and I have seen that experience in previous history of working together and exercises that we've done with individuals in the industry. And, the amount of people who have never set eyes on a retrofit design before.
That's a really valid point. I think it's really important also that the designer and coordinator explain, I wouldn't say each retrofit design, but at least for every archetype to the actual installer. It's really interesting, as Ben has been saying, that it's a tick box exercise. We're trying to change that, but what tends to happen is that the design pack has been created and the actual installer, the gangs on site installing them, have never actually laid eyes on a retrofit design pack. They continue to install like they always have. And then in the process, they stop, they sometimes miss key elements such as, different fabric elements penetrating each other, junctions, etc. So it's quite common in the industry. So yeah, it has to be fit for purpose. It has to be for that specific property, and it should be explained to the actual installer.
I do have information. I do have quite clear slides on minimum requirements for different types of systems as well, guys. So that is coming, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Rudy. If there's any questions, guys, please dive into the chat box. We want to make sure that we are giving you information that is beneficial to you. Okay, to carry on with large-scale retrofit, multiple dwelling retrofit. Okay, this is quite an interesting one, but for me, this is very, very logical. Blocks of dwellings, blocks of flats may need oh God, I've seen a spelling error. Rudy's going to pick me up on that later. Will or may need whole block assessments and whole block designs, as well as individual dwelling assessment and designs, which will then form a complete package. And that is clause 5.4.2 for reference, okay? And again, it's a very important point, but it's a very logical, because how can you retrofit one flat in a block of flats by not looking at the block as well? Rudy or Ben, any comment on that, please?
Yeah, I think this is that age-old issue that's kind of created by the way in which we analyze the performance of buildings that are existing buildings, isn't it? It's the usefulness of that EPC/that EPR, and actually you're considering holistically a design for an entire building. So clearly that design isn't necessarily going to apply to the communal areas. And you'll quite often get that juxtaposition of what happens in those communal areas versus what happens in the individual dwellings as well. And of course, the IOE is for an individual dwelling because it's based off of full SAP or RDSAP. So then you kind of have this gap that some things fall down in the retrofit design as well. So I think quite often, yeah, absolutely, there needs to be a holistic block-based design rather than a kind of individual dwelling-based design as well. And I think that is a goal that quite a lot of designers miss, even some of the good designers out there as well, to be quite frank.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben. Rudy?
No, completely agree. Not much to add to that. It's interesting because I was going through all the changes in PAS and I realized that for some of us, nothing has changed. We've been doing all of this since the 2019 version. So I'm glad, obviously, not everybody was following this, which is why it had to be spelled out as best practice now and as the law now. But completely agree. What happens is, when you're looking at the bigger problem is when you're looking at blocks where there's leaseholders, for example, so social housing plus leaseholders, and you might not get access to a few of the units within a block. And what tends to happen is, real life scenario, you've got EWI, let's say, and windows to be installed on that block of flats, and you've got 8 tenants signed up and the 2 leaseholders refusing. How do you then go ahead and install that measure? So yes, it has to be looked at every individual dwelling, but also the block in its entirety, but also the common areas, as Ben mentioned. There's so much heat loss sometimes. There's so many factors that are missed out because it's not looked as a whole. So when we work on retrofit designs, we look at, obviously every individual dwelling needs its own assessment, air pressure testing, etc. But we also have a block design, because if you're looking at fabric measures especially, you can't design it for one flat. It has to be for the block as well. So yeah, to go hand in hand.
Thank you very much. Sorry, somebody just asked me for a join link. I'm just trying to get them for 2 now. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, guys. And Ben, you also mentioned improvement option evaluations, which is another focus. So improvement option evaluations of dwelling types or archetypes are also very similar to the retrofit assessments. They're required before the design is started. But improvement option evaluations for each dwelling shall be undertaken prior to completion of the retrofit design package, clause 8.1.2. So very much the same as what we said about the retrofit assessments, also for the improvement option evaluation as well. Okay.
Could I just add on that, Laura?
Yes.
That's incredibly important, and we have seen some creeps of practice where it doesn't get done. You just think about if you're going out to design any building, regardless of retrofit or any sort of energy efficiency measures, you would expect a brief to be there to inform your design, wouldn't you? You wouldn't go and just kind of holistically just start slapping a load of different components on the building without having a design brief. So that IOE is the design brief. The energy assessment enables you to see how the performance is of that building. The IOE then enables you to say what needs to happen to that building to make it perform better. And that just informs your brief as to what components you're putting on the building. You can't have a design without that. That's my take on that anyway. And Rudy, as a designer specifically, you might have a similar view on that.
So there's yes. One of the things that tends to happen is if you look at a block of flats, again, going back to blocks of flats, you'll find that flats that are sandwiched in between have a different rating to those on the sides that have more walls exposed, elevations exposed. So an IOE for every single flat is extremely important, but it's also important that the client's brief is understood. So for example, if you're looking at a block of flats and there's a flat sandwiched in between, which is a high D, and the ones on the side are low Ds, the number of measures the surrounding flats would be more to get to a C as opposed to the one sandwiched in between. And the IOE then has to be presented for each flat, but also for the block then to maintain some sort of consistency. You can't go and install, 5 measures on the flats surrounding flats, and then one measure on the one just heating controls, for example, and the one that's sand-based in between. So absolutely, I think IOEs, which is why Paz says that you look at the whole building as a whole, but also every single flat needs its own assessment, IOE, etc. So you can put together a sensible improvement option evaluation and medium-term improvement plan and look at it holistically and not just as individual units.
We've got a little bit of feedback. Bear with me just 1 second. Lee, go for it. You've got your hand up for me.
Yeah, there's just a question from George Lloyd, and I wondered whether Rudy could have a look at it about design.
Yeah, perfect. So I'm an installer for general EWI as well as holding older traditional buildings and coordinator. Why is it not mandatory for the design to be generated in CAD showing both exterior and interior layout for all EAMs? At least then installers have drawings to work with specs.
So opinion, obviously, I can't understand how you could have a design pack, a retrofit design, or a property that needs any kind of solid wall insulation that's not made in CAD. I think it should be mandatory. Absolutely, completely agree with you. We would take it one step further. We start off with a scan, as I said, capture a point cloud, which we then transfer onto BIM. So we create a digital twin of the property and then do all the modeling on Revit, including heat loss calculations, etc. So absolutely, I think it should be completely mandatory, interior, exterior. And it also really helps when you're having discussions with planning officers, conservation officers, etc. If you've got everything done digitally, prepared digitally, because I fail to understand how, if it was just hand sketched or an Excel sheet, sometimes I've seen Excel sheets, presented as a retrofit design pack. They've got all of the elements required, but it's more of a tick box exercise, as Ben said. So yeah, I think it should be mandatory. I agree with you.
I hope that answered your question, even though it didn't, but we can't answer why it's not. But I hope that gives you just a little bit of insight. And I suppose potentially it's something coming. I don't know. Ben, have you got anything to add?
Just, and again, opinion, it should be. There's no reason why it shouldn't be. And I think, again, it all gets chucked into that barrel with race to the bottom, everybody competing with each other to try and do something at the lowest price. In reality, if you're going to be installing something, that is a high risk component to the building. We've seen that through various DESNZ committees where people are living with mushrooms in their properties. You need to have an adequate design so so somebody's got liability at very least to go back to that design as well. But there are clearly other implications of having an adequate design to put something on a property as well. So yeah, it should be, in my opinion.
Sorry, just picking up the response. Yes, perhaps in the near future, fingers crossed. It's always developing, isn't it? What I want to say, guys, is I've had a couple of questions come through. Some questions I will be leaving to the end because we've got quite a lot of content. So Lee, thank you for your question. I will pick that up once we've finished, if that's okay, because that's quite a nice discussion. But there is one from Megan Ballantyne. Who determines the archetypes? Very good question.
It's an interesting one. The projects I work on, it's normally the retrofit designers that would identify the archetypes. I'm aware of certain social housing landlords that have appointed consultants to do an archetyping exercise across all of their stock. In some cases, it's also the retrofit coordinator, but I think the responsibility should lie with the designers because they're the ones that will be designing. They can then try and with input from the coordinator, of course, because they can then start looking at all of the data of all of the fabric elements of each building. And then so start off with what I call fabric archetyping. So the roof type, wall type, number of bedrooms, all of that. And then once that archetyping has been done, then move on to the next round of archetyping, which would be more visual. All of this can be done via desktop based on EPC data and using tools like Google Earth and Google Street View. Once this is done, then you would move on to a final round of archetyping or tweaking the archetypes you've already done or adding sub-archetypes based on what information you get from the retrofit assessment. So there's no definition, there's no role specified within PAS, to my knowledge, that says this is the person that needs to do the archetyping, but I think it'd be sensible if it was the retrofit designer with input from the client and coordinator.
Thank you, Rudy. Ben, anything to add?
No, just completely agree with Rudy on there, to be honest with you. But what I've seen is a mixture of different people compiling archetypes. Generally, it is a retrofit designer when it's done properly, but these could be from the client, it could be from the installer, it could be from anybody along the line of the process, to be honest with you, to varying different results.
And it does mean when we say by archetype, we think, oh, actually, that's quite a nice exercise. You can still have between 150, 200 plus archetypes per project.
Yeah.
So it's still a fair amount of work. It's not not a cheats way out of doing it. You've still got to do a lot of work to do it. But Dwayne De Silva's just popped a really good question in the chat. Who makes the decisions based on the IOEs for specific property archetypes? Well, I'll take a loose answer and then share with our experts, guys. Obviously, our improvement option evaluations is what we want to achieve. It's what we want to achieve and what is achievable for that property. So we want to take the end goal. We want to improve our SAP. We want to lower our energy bills. We want to look at our carbon reduction targets, and we want to look at who's in that property. So correct me if I'm wrong, Rudy and Ben, but when we are determining the IOEs per archetype, then we are looking at what we can do within the cost that we can do as well. And that really then is determined, it's a group effort. Ben, do you agree? It's effectively understanding what the client wants, what we can achieve, how that can be taken forward.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head with that statement there, Laura, to be honest with you. I think that we often lose sight over who does what, because there is a responsibility matrix somewhere that says the coordinator has to do X and the designer has to do Y. In reality, these are people's homes that we're talking about. So I think there needs to be a collaboration on this. Yes, the designer and or the retrofit coordinator can be ultimately responsible for how that's put together and for the advice included therein. But this needs to be compiled with the client. And I've worked on projects many times where you see... All right. But I've worked on projects many times where I've seen the retrofit coordinator almost kind of dictate what's going to happen to the property with no sort of negotiation. When in reality, the client should be placed to turn around, whether or not that's an individual homeowner, whether or not it's a social landlord or anything in between. You should be able to turn around and say, no, I don't think that's going to work at the property. Can you find something else, please? So therefore, it does become a collaboration exercise between a number of parties, and for good reason as well. I'd suggest that there can't be one person that is effectively responsible for putting that brief together, because it needs to be informed as to what would work in terms of advice from a qualified professional, but also the person who's got the tangible knowledge for that asset themselves, which will ultimately always be the customer or client.
And what we've got to remember is this is a cyclic process. So when it comes to monitoring and evaluating, we are monitoring our intended outcomes. Our IOEs are based on our intended outcomes. So if the project fails, it's failing on the intended outcomes, which are effectively filtered then into the IOEs. Thank you so much for your questions, guys. I am going to move on because I still have some content to cover, but we are absolutely going to pick up any questions we don't pick up at point of discussion will be picked up at the end, okay? Okay, fantastic on large-scale retrofit. Thank you so much, guys. The next change we're going to talk about is a nice short one. Beautiful traditional buildings. I have a soft spot for traditional buildings. Makes up approximately 1/3 of our UK building stock. And this is quite simply, they have now been defined. And the definition is buildings with solid brick, stone or earth external walls, constructed with moisture permeable materials and usually built prior to 1919 or pre-1919, timber frame external walls with any infill. Pre-1919 determines the time before cavity walls. We started seeing our, Angela, you're going to be impressed with this, started seeing our narrow cavity walls, guys, our finger cavity walls around the 1920s, where we started seeing cavity walls as pretty much our standard construction from the 1930s. So pre-1919 is a very key date. Along with this, we have Annex E, which will support, it will support with significance, and it will support with heritage assessments. And your coordinator and your assessor and your designer will all have to be accredited to level 3 Order in Traditional Buildings if you are working on a pre-1919 traditional building property. And you can find that literature in A1.2, A2.2 and A3.8 for reference within the standard, okay? I don't really want to do a discussion around that, it's fairly simple. So we are going to move on to the next, okay? The next change we're going to talk about is climate resilience and moisture management focus. This focus is covered and this focus is covered, I don't know what that first sentence means, Rudy's going to pick me up on that as well, but we are looking at considering the holistic approach again. So quite often you're going to find over these next couple of slides, we have already discussed quite a lot with the element of changes. So the first detail we're looking at with climate resilience and moisture management focus is the whole dwelling approach. We are looking at these properties individually and we are taking into consideration within our retrofit assessment, the condition, any sort of water ingress, the moisture element, the condensation, the mold, it all needs to be considered. And a point was brought up by Ben earlier on, just in terms of the repairs and maintenance element. Quite often that can kind of get left by the wayside. We all know why that is. Opinion, it is all to do with the time and the budget. Because when we are doing our repairs and maintenance prior to these energy efficiency measures going in, it costs money. And if we've not budgeted for that, what's going to happen? But it is so important. It is so important to be ensuring that our buildings are in good condition because, you know, a very simple element, if we've got damaged rainwater goods, damaged building fabric, we're putting external wall insulation on and we're not making sure that is of good condition first. We are affecting the sustainability element of that building. We could ruin that building. So the whole dwelling approach is so important. The next element is the retrofit design should include provision for management of moisture in line with BS 5250. So the moisture management in buildings, that is in clause 8.2.10. So we need to ensure that we are considering the moisture management within our design. And this leads on to our climate resilience. We want to make sure that we are improving so that years down the line, it's still working in layman's terms. We want to make sure that building is sustainable, is going to last. So we need to be considering the moisture element, not just the condensation, not just the damp that potentially is there, but what we could be causing. And it goes back to Jonathan's point about overheating. The retrofit design should also include measures to inhibit overheating during the installed life of the energy efficiency measures. Clause 8.2.31 and aligning that with the technical guides. Now, what I am going to say, guys, is these are not verbatim unless they are notes, okay? They are abridged versions. Ben, go for it. Oh, I thought you wanted to say something then.
No, sorry.
No, you're fine. So I'd like to draw your attention to the notes on your screen, guys. The materials specified in the retrofit design should match the moisture strategy, I can't say that very well, of the existing building. This may mean maintaining a dynamic moisture equilibrium within the construction for which the vapor permeable membrane and capillary active materials are most suited. And I think a layman's term and a layman's example of that is our traditional building with polystyrene external wall insulation, isn't it? So we are making sure that our materials are matching our building to support them, to not detriment them. It also aligns with the medium-term plan. So medium-term plans, clause 8.1.4, 8.1, 8.15 and 8.17 are a requirement rather than guidance. And these medium-term plans are completed by the coordinator and they must consider potential issues regarding flooding, extreme weather and overheating. In 2019, it was guidance. It's now a requirement. It will protect the longevity of the building. Ben or Rudy, any comment on that?
Yeah, this has been one of my bugbears in 2019, to be honest with you. It's there needs to be a mechanism in place for this, because too often it gets overlooked. And again, this was one of the items that was divvied up by the risk paths previously. I have always looked for this on the various different designs to ensure that the overheating specifically is looked into as part of this. It can be a really simple calculation for a SAP model, but as long as something's there and the design then considers it, because what is the point of putting a load of external wall insulation or internal wall insulation in a property that's going to make it nice and warm in winter, but make it unlivable in summer? Because you then have the opposite issue, don't you? You've got a property that is livable in winter, but then something that doesn't make any sense whatsoever in summer, and something that's really uncomfortable. So if internal air quality and resident comfort is one of your intended outcomes, which more often than not is going to be, you failed if you don't do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I completely agree. I think if these calculations were not being done, it kind of defeats the purpose of a retrofit design, in my opinion. So what we do as standard practice is, and again, we've been doing it since 2019 and before, is that we'd run overheating calcs, look at the moisture movement within the building, look at the material choices. We not only look at vapor open, vapor closed, etc., but also look at sustainability. So which suppliers to use based on how sustainable they are and where they are on their own zero carbon journey. And all of this, I'd like to point out that 30% of the projects that I'm currently working on, 30% of the properties within the projects that I'm working on are remediations of prior retrofit gone wrong, especially EWI. So I think I can't stress enough on the importance of all of this, including, I think on the previous slide, Laura, you had water ingress, which is, water will seep in if buildings aren't designed properly. There was a few, I think about a year or two ago, verge trims, as they used to be called, were banned from EWI systems. Now, I've been involved in EWI installation on over, I think, 3,000, 4,000 properties just as a single measure. And none of those properties ever had any problems with water ingress. And yet they were banned because most installers, again, race to the bottom, not looking at quality, installed these and water was seeping through because of poor installation. And now they've been replaced by roof closure systems, I think they're called now. But it was more of a quality issue than anything. The standard was still great. It was just installers not really correctly, either knowing how to install them correctly or not installing them correctly. Therefore, the retrofit design absolutely must consider all of these things and more. And which also what George said earlier, you need to have a CAD drawing. How can you do all of this if you don't have a model that you can run simulations on?
It really does go back to being, it's logical, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not illogical, it's completely logical. Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you, Rudy. All right, the next change is more defined roles and responsibilities, significantly so for the retrofit designer and retrofit coordinator. Now we're going to start with the coordinator, okay? The coordinator, clause 6.1 in the new standard, along with the existing duty, should also create a plan for monitoring and evaluating in line with the retrofit project, be this small scale or very significantly so retrofit at scale, at large scale. The retrofit evaluator shall be a retrofit coordinator qualified in accordance with A2A.4. The reason that they're keeping an evaluator role in is for changes that may come in the near future, but the evaluator role is documented to be taken up by the retrofit coordinator. This is a hot point of topic. The coordinator must ensure sufficient evidence is collected to satisfy the requirements of PAS 2035-2023 via in-person or virtual or remote site inspections. And if any measure connects or penetrates another fabric EAM, in-person visits are required. Now, it also states, if an in-person site inspection is not possible, the coordinator can collect digital evidence from a third party for the following measures only: hot water cylinder insulation, primary pipework insulation, draft proofing, single new or replacement windows, single new or replacement doors, replacement of storage heaters, heating or hot water controls, boiler replacement, radiator reflector panels, direct communal heating meters or connection, energy efficiency lighting, energy efficient appliances, solar PV, solar water heating, cavity wall insulation, party cavity wall insulation, loft insulation, and solid floor insulation. Singly, they can collect digital third-party evidence. However, if it's more than one or any of those will penetrate a fabric energy efficiency measure, an in-person visit is required. Now, it states in the standard that the visit is set by the coordinator and the client, and it is based on size and complexity of the project. But I will also draw your attention to note 1. The retrofit coordinator may visit site at any stage during construction, but in order to verify compliance to 2035, it's beneficial to attend when they can view the interaction of the EAMS, the installation of the air barrier, the installation of the thermal bridge details and air tightness or air leakage testing, and verify that the correct products are being installed in line with the retrofit design. That is fairly self-explanatory. Coordinators should be visiting sites, especially on complex installations. I personally think that is a good thing. It is all in the standard. Rudy or Ben, any comment on that? That is actual fact, that is standard, that is fairly simple.
I think, again, as I said, that to me, it seems like nothing's changed because this has always been best practice. We've always been doing it. Also, it's slightly confusing because it says digital evidence can be will suffice if the coordinator can't visit. And in my head, the coordinator always gets digital evidence in the form of pre, mid, and post photographs. So that's, I'm guessing it's pretty much similar. So I'd like some information on this myself, I think. But absolutely, I think the retrofit coordinator needs to visit. And regardless, again, we can look at the standard or we can look at best practice. So regardless of what measures are being installed, the coordinator should be frequenting sites, speaking to installers, homeowners, giving advice, meeting up with designers on site. I think that's what best practice is and should be done.
Perfect, thank you very much. Jordan, hello, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Yeah, it was just a quick one. Obviously, I was joined the ECMK webinar the other day for coordinators, and it come up with the issue with the coordinator now being obviously always responsible for the sign off for the job. If they're not competent under 2030, what makes them competent to sign off a site visit?
A really interesting question, and this is where it goes back to what Ben was saying. It has to be a collaborative approach, and where I said at the start, you are relying on the role before you to be competent in their role to allow you to be able to do your role. Now, what you have to remember with a coordinator is they will oversee every part of the process, and they will be in conversation. And one of the big changes in the standard, which is not a technical change, is the fact that there should be more communication between the coordinator and designer and the installer and the designer. So absolutely, I get your point. How can they be competent if they're not competent in 2030? But you, and I'm going to say you should be having very competent installers in place. You should be having competent PIBs done. You should be having competent inspectors inspecting those PIBs to be done, which I've got a slide on, which is going to come up very shortly. Unfortunately, you have to be relying on each of those roles. We do have accreditation schemes there to ensure that we have the best people. It can get filtered down in terms of, you know, the subcontractors that you have on site. But you should have that level of confidence to understand what is being done via the designer, via the installer, to be able to confidently sign that off. I know that's a fairly fluffy answer. I'm going to hand over to Ben because he's also got his hand up as well to kind of add a little bit more to that.
Yeah, I'll start by saying in an unrelated matter, I'm going to have to jump off at 12:30, Laura, because I have a guest
That's
downstairs. But I will also commit to working with you and Rudy to answer any Q&As that do come through that aren't answered as a part of this call as well. I'm releasing something afterwards. In terms of the retrofit coordinator role, and this is where I do the shameless plug, we developed something called the Retrofit Toolkit Retrofit at Volume, which revolves around the REBA stages, and it kind of compares various different roles in PAS to the REBA stages. I think it's really useful because it positions the retrofit coordinator role in its true form, which is effectively a project manager for a construction project if you strip it back to its basic bones. You are involved as a retrofit coordinator from concept to completion and past for that project. So in that case, and going back to what Rudy said, first of all, if you are a construction project manager, when would a construction project manager ever not visit the site where they're working on the construction? It just wouldn't happen. They'd visit weekly, pretty much. So you need to be visiting that site to make sure things are working. And that then links into the competence question at the end of it. A building surveyor, a architect, a contract administrator, a quantity surveyor, none of them are necessarily qualified to carry out installations, but they're qualified to oversee those installations, and they know what they should be looking for, and they would have been involved in the process from the very start of a procurement for those separate items. So in reality, they know what the brief is. If there's an adequate design there, they know what the design is, they know what the PIBs are, they know what the intent behind the installation is. So actually, yeah, absolutely, they can sign off the project. But just like a contract administrator, architect, QS will all sign off any construction project through a JCT contract or an NEC contract. I think I completely appreciate what you're saying about not being PAS 2030 accredited. But the PAS 2030 accreditation is designed to go hand in hand with the 2035 accreditation. And if you read through the standard, as we're all supposed to, as retrofit coordinators, it does arm you with the required knowledge to provide that sign-off. I mean, let's not forget here that just like any standard, there is a lot of writing in it. The reason I like PAS 2035 and 2030 is because they are prescriptive standards. They tell you exactly what you've got to do, line by line, in simple English. Don't try and confuse you with legal English or anything like that. They tell you what you need to do. So provided you can go out with that standard, read through it line by line, and put your thumb up at the end of it, there's no reason that you can't sign off that project.
Thank you, Ben. And enjoy your afternoon. We will reconvene. We will reconvene at a later date. Thank you so much.
Thanks ever so much, everybody. See you later on.
Thanks, Ben.
Bye, Ben. We are running a little bit behind, guys, obviously, because, we like to have the conversation. And actually, the way that I look at it is, yes, we're going through this, but you learn sometimes more from the conversations than you do from reading a screen. So, Rudy, would you like to pick that up before I move on?
Yeah, so just really quickly, I think sort of reiterate what I already said. Once the retrofit design has been made and it's property specific, which it needs to be, best practice would be for the retrofit designer and retrofit coordinator to host a meeting and explain it to the installers. And of course, there's multiple installers if there's multiple measures. And in that process, everybody on the call, all stakeholders understand what needs to be installed and how. And because the designer has then created the design, the evidence shouldn't just be shared with the retrofit coordinators. It should also be shared with the designers so they can also sign off. The good news is that, once you've installed the measure, it doesn't end there. The PAS process doesn't end there. There's warranties you have to claim. So I know we've got some really good people from the EWI world on the call. So, they would look at this evidence as well, and they would have to issue their guarantees, warranties, it'd have to go to an industry body like SWIGA, Quality Mark, etc. for another sign off. So there's multiple tiers here where people will be monitoring. So even if a mistake was made during sign off, there's risk mitigation at many different levels, which is great, which is, I think, why PAS is great. So I think hopefully that will take care of it. But if you just follow best practice and make sure the design is explained to the installer in the presence of the coordinator, hopefully everyone understands how the product or system needs to be installed. And then give you the confidence to sign off.
Fantastic. Jonathan, would you be able to pop your question or comment into the chat? Because I'm quite conscious that there's a few more bits I want to run through. I'm conscious people are going to want to drop off at 12:30 because that's what it was originally benchmark, even with the half an hour overhang. If you have got to jump off, that's absolutely fine, guys. I do have a recording and the slide set I will send out to you as well. But I would like to get a little bit more content in before, as soon as we can. Thank you very much, Rudy. So continuing on the theme of defined roles and responsibilities, the designer qualifications have also been defined. And this is quite an interesting one because I'm going to read through them all, okay? For a single improvement measure, the designer will be a specialist designer or specifier of that measure and hold a measure-specific qualification. Now, we say that this standard is very descriptive, but not necessarily prescriptive sometimes. In theory, if you are doing single improvement measure, your designer could be your measure installer as long as they hold the relevant competency for that measure. When we're talking, thank you very much, everybody. If you have to leave, like I said, I will send out the recording for you. For a single system, the designer will be a specialist designer or specifier of the system who has been trained and approved by the manufacturer or supplier of that system. Where a single improvement measure is a combustion appliance, the designer must be trained by the manufacturer and or hold gas safe registration, or be a chartered building services engineer. Now, within these are going to be very small projects, aren't they? They're going to be potential local authority projects, and it's going to be few and far between. When we're talking about ECO or when we're talking about SHDF, these are the changes that we are looking for, okay? For two interacting fabric measures, the designer should be a specialist or specifier of one or both systems and must take the whole house approach, including ventilation and overheating as part of the design. And the note is really important. Clause 8 requires the retrofit designer follow the whole house approach and, among other requirements, should be responsible for the ventilation and overheating as part of the retrofit design. So the overheating and the ventilation is the responsibility of the retrofit designer, whoever they are dependent on measures. Now, for 3 or more interacting fabric measures, high-rise buildings or system-built dwellings, the designer must be, and I'm going to look at my notes because I don't know what these letters mean without looking for them. They must be a chartered architectural technologist registered by the Chartered Institute of Architectural Technologies. They must be an architect registered by the Architects Registration Board. They must be a professional member of the Chartered Institute of Buildings or a chartered building surveyor. And this is where the weight comes down when we are working on very large-scale retrofit projects with 3 or more interacting fabric measures. We need our very specific designer accreditations. And to add on to that, if we are doing work on a traditionally defined building, the designer must also be qualified under the level 3 or level 6 old and traditional buildings. Level 6 in Scotland, level 3 in Wales no longer exists, but they are equivalent. So if you have that, it's still fine. The level 3 in old and traditional buildings or conservation accredited with anything on your screen. So we need to look at the projects individually. We need to look at the properties, and we need to ensure that if we've got a split project, that we've got the correct designers for each property. Rudy, would you like to talk a little bit around this?
Just if you go back 2 slides, the one that says single measure, dual measure, again, opinion. And also just to clarify what you said, you mentioned that this is mostly for single measure, smaller projects. Not naming or shaming anyone, but if there's any colleagues from the social housing world on the call, this is a huge risk within the social housing sector for Wave 3 and beyond. And there's been at least 3 tenders that I've looked at in the last 2 months where, and I'm talking about a combined value of over 250 million pounds, where the design element has been asked to price with respect to, okay, give us a price for a single measure, give us a price for double measure, etc. Which basically means PAS has been taken very literally, and don't hate me for saying this, but common sense hasn't prevailed. And what's happened is that people have, it's basically a race to the bottom, as Ben was saying. So what's happening is I've then found out the results, and there's been jobs awarded to people that have priced £100 for a retrofit design for an EWI project, for example, which is just, I don't know how it's going to happen. And it just shows you know what the risks are and what quality you'll get for that money. It's not even about the money. It's the fact that PAS is being taken literally. and this is being used for procurement on large scale projects. So as best practice, if you move forward 2 slides now, the qualifications you had on the screen are what I would look at if I was looking at procuring for a large scale retrofit project. This is what I would look at as standard. If it was large scale, if it was a one-off single dual measure, eco, GBIS, etc., then it doesn't matter as long as you can check competence, experience, etc., and get support from the manufacturer.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rudy. Again, guys, slides will be sent out with these details on. Okay. Stronger focus on monitoring and evaluating. So as we've already discussed, the retrofit coordinator now takes the role of the evaluator, and the note is very important. Although the role of the retrofit evaluator is filled by the coordinator, separately defined role is retained so that specialist qualifications that are proposed for this role can be added in to later editions. Our coordinator must be looking to prepare a monitoring and evaluating plan. They should be working closely with all other roles, the assessor, the designer, installer. We've talked about this. This is a collaborative role. It is a cyclic role. They oversee every part of the project. Every role, the assessor begins, the designer relies on the assessor, the installer relies on the designer. The coordinator is the element that brings this project together. They're a souped-up project manager. They act in the client and the public interest. They should be neutral. They should be overseeing it all. They need to gather sufficient evidence from site at a number of stages to ensure compliance with 2035, which we've discussed. They should liaise with the designer on any alterations within the retrofit design. And they should align with BS 40101, which is Building Performance Evaluation of Occupied and Operational Buildings. And that should be followed when they are monitoring and evaluating the project. Remember, we are monitoring and evaluating our intended outcomes. So the process is so cyclic that we are going back to the beginning. We are monitoring what we set out to do. And quite often, again, that is watered down. The coordinators need a plan in place, and they need to ensure that if basic monitoring and evaluating is not enough, they have a plan for further. And the monitoring and evaluating plan really should be based on the size and complexity of the project. Okay. Ventilation, seal it tight, vent it right. Ventilation has been made simpler within the standard. There is the introduction of Annex C to simplify ventilation, but I've seen a lot, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you are on my LinkedIn network. You would have seen a lot of back and forth about air tightness testing over the last week or so, okay? There is a requirement for air tightness and air leakage strategies for all projects where the fabric is being improved, 8.2.35, but note, the air leakage test verifies there are no major air leaks through the installed EAMS. Ideally, and this is going to answer one of the questions we had in the chat, ideally a test before and after any major insulation project should be undertaken to ensure that the air leakage has been reduced from the building envelope. If you are doing air leakage or air pressure testing at the start, you should be doing it at the end, the equivalent of what you've started with. There is no point in just doing a start or just doing an end because you do not have anything to verify it to. You should be having a starting block. Air leakage should be done before and after works have been completed. But I also want to draw your attention to this next slide, okay? Air tightness and air leakage are different. Air tightness targets can be very beneficial to improve quality control and workmanship during the construction stage. Verification of the air tightness standard is different from the air leakage testing as described in Note 1. Air tightness testing is only mandatory if an air tightness target is specified in your air tightness strategy. Air tightness and air leakage difference. Continuous and intermittent are clearly defined and cross-referenced with Part F of the devolved nation that you are working in diagram 3.1. And ventilation should be defined as part of the retrofit design from the designer. The big detail for me is you must have an air tightness and air leakage strategy when your fabric is being upgraded. If you are installing a major insulation measure, you should be having an air tightness target. Loft insulation, for example, is one of the only insulation measures where you do not need to upgrade ventilation, you need to maintain the minimum standard. So therefore, you may not consider an air tightness target, but any other insulation measures, it really should be part of your strategy. But just to clarify, if there is no target set within your strategy, your air pressure test and your air leakage test is not mandatory, but you need to be considering the size and the complexity of your project and what you are trying to achieve. You need to be considering your intended outcomes, your improvement option evaluations. We go back to holistic. It is not a one size fits all. Every property is individual. Rudy, any comment on that?
I completely agree. I think ventilation is the most important part of retrofit. It should be taken very seriously. Air pressure tests, air leakage tests, also really important depending on what improvements are being made. As you said, there was a question I had 3 years ago. I walked into a property that was being upgraded, and I looked at there was a continuous running DMF being installed, and there were trickle vents because of new windows in the wet rooms. And I asked the question to the retrofit designer at the point. I said, why do you have trickle vents here when you've got this continuous running DMF fan? And they said, because that's the standard. And I said, it shouldn't be, because if you think, you have to also use common sense. And if you try to think about why things exist and why these standards exist, you get a lot of the answers. So if you think about a bathroom with an extractor fan running all the time, and you've got a trickle vent, what's essentially going to happen is most of the air that's coming in through the trickle vent is going to go out from this extractor fan, which is great for the bathroom, for the wet room itself, but it's going to not allow as much suction from the other parts of the house. So it sort of defeats the purpose. I think in the new updated, to my knowledge, it's been changed now, and it said you don't need to have, it has, right? So that's one. And if you think of, it's not just insulation either, and you also have to be very careful about over ventilation. So something, again, very common, because most people don't do air pressure tests and air leakage tests. What tends to happen is older properties tend to have background ventilation present within walls. And then you go and upgrade the windows and you've got new trickle vents. And what that leads to is over ventilation. A lot of the times when EWI is being installed, for example, the installers tend to, unless specified on the design, and if they've actually seen a physical design, they tend to go around the existing ventilation, yet, new windows have been installed on the property and now there's trickle vents as well. So that's something else. It's not always that because you're improving the building fabric, you're reducing the existing ventilation. In some cases, you're actually increasing it, especially with new windows. So I think having a strategy is really important, because you don't want to over-ventilate or under-ventilate. It has to be just right, which can't be achieved without testing and strategy.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rudy. And just to kind of hammer home the point, Part F has been updated now, and it is paint by numbers. It is absolutely paint by numbers in terms of the background ventilation to the mechanical ventilation and how that should be done throughout the property. It is there in black and white. So thank you very much for that. Now, the last topic we're going to cover is 2030. So there is minimal, I'm saying 2030, my computer screen is just completely and utterly frozen on me. I told you the sheep are getting tired. PAS 2030, there is minimal changes within PAS 2030 with a very few exceptions. So when we're talking about 2030, which is our installer standard, remember MCS is not a retrofit standard. MCS is an installation standard. It is not retrofit. It is for new build or retrofit, whereas 2030 is written in alignment with 2035. Our installer update, the requirements and qualifications for independent inspections of the pre-installation building inspections has been strengthened in some annexes. Requirements and guidance about moisture management and buildings is brought in line with BS 5250. And there is a sub-clause 7.4.4 regarding remedial works during construction. So, we know PIBIs must be completed by the installer prior to the install starting. A PIBI, a pre-installation building inspection, is there to verify the suitability of the retrofit design. Can it be installed at the location? Is it sufficient? Will it work? The retrofit installer must complete a valid PIBI for that reason, okay? The retrofit installer must then also confirm whether the repair works detailed in the retrofit design have taken place. It is about bringing our building into a good condition. Now, the big changes for the PIBIs are in the blue notes. Clause 7.2.2. The installer must give time and location for all PIBIs to the coordinator and certification bodies and make arrangements for the PIBI to be assessed upon request by the certification body if it wishes to do so. Clause 7.2.6. Records of the PIBI and its findings related to the method statement, design and client issues shall be made by the PIBI inspector and retained by the retrofit installer. Copy should also be made available to the retrofit coordinator and all relevant validation bodies on request. If you are installing any of these measures, you must get your PIBIs inspected by a third party that is qualified to do so. They must be independent from the retrofit installer and retrofit contractor. They must be qualified to a relevant standard, and the installer should also encourage the persons that they have appointed to inspect the PIBIs to familiarise themselves with BS 7913, Conservation of Historic Buildings, and BS 5250. So this is the big change for installers in the industry. I've just copy and pasted from the standard to show you the wording, but it is only these fabric measures. Now, the opinion is that's obviously going to add cost to certain contracts. And you need to be very careful as an installer who you are engaging. They need to be independent. They need to be qualified to oversee that measure. I've had a discussion about the designers doing it. In theory, it's the designers marking their own work. It's not that they can't. There's clauses in the standard to say that you can have assessors, coordinators, designers be the same person or company as long as there is no conflict of interest, or if there is a conflict of interest, it is declared to the client. But it does mean that the independent PIBI inspectors have to be confident within their role. I've put this on screen. This is a screenshot directly from the standard because, again, we know that the vocational competence is a grey area. Vocational competence hold in a regulated industry, agreed occupational qualification or apprenticeship, etc., etc., etc. What they do say in terms of the independent PIBI checks is the second part on that screen. A recognised pre-notification process has been undertaken under an industry quality assurance scheme for, I've got cavity wall on this one, I've just screenshotted it from the cavity wall annex. If you are a member of a CPS scheme, a competent person scheme for your measure, you will be able to effectively submit your PIBIs because you will be under monitoring from the CPS scheme. But it does mean a bit of a change, especially for small installers and integrating another level into that process. The fact of the matter is it absolutely has to be done and it absolutely has to be following the standard. Rudy, do you have any comment on that?
I think you're the expert on this, Laura. You're the installer. So yeah, I agree with everything you said.
It into my porridge because it's a bit of a challenge for us, but there we go.
It is a challenge. I think PIBIs being done by an independent body is extremely challenging. Ben said earlier that there's 2.5 billion worth of funding over the next 3 years. I think it's slightly a lot more than that because of, if you factor in ECO, GBIS, etc. You have to understand that 2 years ago, the level of funding that was available was a lot less. So you suddenly got more funding, a lot more funding. And where do you get the people to do all of this? So now if you suddenly need, thousands of inspectors that can do PIBI now, I mean, these people don't exist. So where do they come from? How do you define what best practice is? But yes, I think PIBI as a function itself is extremely, as a task is extremely important. And again, follow best practice. I've seen some really poor PIBI templates that don't really serve the purpose. So first of all, identify the right template that you'd like to use, capture as much additional information as you can. So if it's a measure like EWI, for example, try and look at restrictions, constraints that might stop you from installing the measure. So it could be things like, can scaffolding be installed? I think you gave a really good example, Laura, when you mentioned about the house on top of a hill, whether vehicles can actually access, is deliveries possible, all of that. So I think PIBI is a really important part of all of this, and we need to find the right people that are going to be able to do this. I wasn't actually aware of this change in the standard that has to now been done by an external. Is it external or independent?
Independent from installer and contractor.
Oh, so it can't be someone employed within your organization if you're the installer. It has to be a third party, basically.
So the standard states independent of the installer and contractor. So it's down to interpretation, unfortunately, in an element, isn't it?
Yes. Because you can have two people within your organization with NVQs in loft insulation, and one could be named as the installer and one as the person doing the PIBI, and that might work because there's a gray area here. So I think this needs further clarification.
Absolutely. And the question comes through, what are the minimum qualifications for a PIBI inspector? A lot of people have been saying that it's the level 3 in site management. Some people are saying there's a PIBI qualification coming out. However, they just need to be technically competent for that measure. Now, I will, based on a point that you just said about making sure your PIBI template is correct, I will say that the installer standard update is defining exactly what needs to be looked at and covered in a PIBI for each individual measure. So if you are an installer on the call, then it is absolutely worth going back to the standard, because that is defined really nicely and really clearly. But there does certainly need to be more discussion around the PIBI inspector, because if you are not CPS, you cannot get CPS for underfloor insulation. It is not part of the CPS scheme. So there needs to be a conversation, and maybe that's something that we could look into and get some kind of industry understanding on or feedback on, because I think certainly for certain installers in ECO significantly more than SHDF, because they are more individual projects, might be more challenging because they will be more spread around. It's going to be a geographical challenge as well as being a competency challenge, I feel.
Yeah.
And to finish off, guys, we do have the focus of moisture management for installers as well. We are absolutely looking to make sure as installers that we are looking at the surrounding area rather than just what we are directly installing. Independent PIBI inspectors should be familiar with BS 5250. Again, don't shout to me for that error, Rudy. And we've also got the base technical guides included in the standard as well. And I've just input the clause for you for 7.4.4 remedial works during construction. And this is the last thing we're going to cover, guys. During the repair works, pre-installation works, or the installation of the EAMS, the installer is responsible for reporting to the coordinator any defects such as structural and moisture-related defects that they are identifying during the works that were not identified in the assessment report, and then seeking advice from the coordinator on how to proceed. In alignment with that, I will say that it also states that assessment should be made available to the installers, not just to the design. So the installers absolutely should be able to have a copy of the retrofit assessment for each property to ensure that what they are doing aligns with that property. Just there's something just coming in the chat, just caught my eye. Requirement for independent checks have been in place for PAS 20 for some fabric measures such as cavity wall. Absolutely, absolutely. So the more higher technical risk, but it's that full list of fabric measures, and they do not have to interact even if they are just single measures. For retrofit installer has multiple level 2 MEQ qualified installers sign each other's PIBI with a clause. Potentially, I suppose that's the grey area that we need to be looking into, because the standard states cannot be the installer or contractor, has to be independent. What that looks like, there is room for interpretation. And lastly, questions, guys. Any questions that have populated your head during this session, please feel free to pop them in the chat or email me directly. You all have my email. I emailed you this morning. For the questions that have come into the chat during the session, we will pick these up, we will answer, and I will send a fact sheet out with the slide deck post-session completion and debrief with Rudy, Lee and Ben. I just want to say a massive thank you to our guests. I know Ben has hopped off and he ever so kindly kind of popped up on LinkedIn saying he wants to be a part of this, which is fantastic. But I just want to share a little bit more about Rudy. So Rudy works for the Specifics Group. The Specifics Group are a group of companies built around retrofit. Rudy, do you want to kind of finish up because you can give more of a debrief on this than I can?
So just very high level, we've got Compliance Specifics that provides end-to-end PAS consultancy services. So your retrofit assessments, coordination, air pressure testing, U-value calcs, etc. We've got Energy Specifics, which is the PAS and MCS installer. We've got Design Specifics, which is our retrofit design and passive house design arm. We've got the Academy that Lee leads on, which is basically certified CPD, all kinds of PAS courses. But we also create bespoke courses for clients. So whether it's a tier 1 or tier 2 contractor or social housing provider, we can create bespoke courses to upskill their teams with respect to PAS and even construction in general. And we've got Eco Energy Matters, which is strategic consultancy for PAS 2035 and PAS 2038, but also looking at other streams of funding, not just SHDF and ECO. Thank you.
Thank you, Rudy. And I've got some just key information from the group as well. Rudy, do you want to talk us through this?
I sort of touched upon this during my introduction, but yeah, we offer, it's a complete turnkey offer that we provide. So it starts off with training, upskilling teams, provide bid support. We've supported over 20 bids, SHDF, different stages. We look at stock selection, we do an archetype analysis, cost analysis, we scan the properties, offer funding support, do assessments, coordination, designs, install and lodgement, and also evaluate, monitoring and evaluation, which is quite key just to understand whether or not the properties have achieved the targets that were set out. In terms of experience, we did about early adopters of PAS, so completed over 500 properties on the demonstrator phase, about 3,000 properties on wave 1, and we've currently got about 6,000. Actually, we've got about 4,000 live, 2,000 we've launched just this month on wave 2.1 and wave 2.2. We also work very closely with several tier 1s and social housing providers. And we're also, our clients also comprise of tier 3 installers that work within the Eco4 and GWIS world in the private housing sector. So we do all of the energy modeling for them, organize funding, do assessments, coordination, and lodgements. Thank
you very much, Rudy. And Lee has kindly put this together for me, guys. This is the Energy Specifics Academy. There is a QR code on your screen, which will take you directly to the Energy Specifics Academy website if you wish to learn more about the courses that they offer, about the CPD that they offer, because we know how focused CPD is at the moment. So thank you very much for that, Lee. And I just want to finish by saying a few things to you guys. So first of all, thank you so much. There is still 91 of you on, and I noticed it dropped off after 12:30 because that was the original finish time. The fact that we've still got 91 of you is incredible. So thank you for staying on and listening to us. I hope you found it a little bit beneficial. The second thing I want to say is that we've put this on independently. I've put this on independently. I phoned Rudy 2 weeks ago and said, Rudy, we need to do this. There's so many questions going around. Let's do something. We have put this on independently. We are not working as part of any scheme. I work for the Henvo Group. Rudy works for Design Group. Lee works for Design Group. Ben works for Bailey Garner. We are simply individuals coming together with different experiences in the industry, wanting to support and wanting to make a difference. I'm very grateful you've been here. Very, very important feedback. If you've enjoyed today's session, tell me. I'd like to know. If you thought it was rubbish, that's fine. Every day is a school day. If we can help any individual, we'll be happy. Okay, so there will be a feedback form coming out with the Q&A, with the slide set and with the recording. I will put it together in a nice little present for you guys. And your present to me will be to give feedback. Pop us on LinkedIn, pop me an email, fill the feedback form. I don't care. I just want to know whether you found this beneficial and whether it's worth considering doing something like this in the near future. And very finally, thank you. just really, really thank you. It genuinely has been an absolute pleasure to spend the last 2 hours with you guys on my birthday morning. I'm not even joking. I say that from the bottom of my heart. I've thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope the information has been concise for you. And I'd like to say thank you to Rudy. Lee, thank you so much for gatekeeping this, because you've taken a massive amount of stress off me. And Ben from Bailey Garner, again, absolute legend, fantastic to have him on, and he will be collating answers as well. So when we do send out the slides, and we do send out the Q&A feedback, it will be collated with all of us, so you will have that industry expert, okay? Somebody, oh, thank you very much. Nimesh, thank you. Somebody just pop your hand up. Did you say anything before we log off? Okay, well, Rudy, if there's nothing from you, and Lee, there's nothing from you, have a fantastic weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
And maybe we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.